Thank you for making your way to Brixton today. Just before I start the event, just to say it's being recorded. So if you don't want to be in any pictures or recordings, if you could either raise your hand or just speak to one of the people kind of organising the event around the sides, just to make sure that you're not in any of the recordings. So anyway, welcome today. Thank you for joining us this evening in Brixton and online. My name's Ellie Sharp. I'm a primary school teacher at Loughborough Primary, just over the road. I'm also an NEU member and author of a book called Lessons in Organising. I'm really pleased and excited to be chairing this important discussion today about what our demands are for a real alternative to the suffering faced by millions. I see every day as a school teacher in my classroom, and we contend with those things that are happening within our society every day, because it walks in our classroom and it's there for the eye to see. In which he has served as the union's head of bargaining and has overseen several successful attempts to take employers to court as is currently leading PCS's legal battle against the government's Rwanda policy. So over to Paul.
Thanks, Ellie, and thanks everybody for that warm introduction. The chair told me I've got 5 minutes to speak, and I want to cover a span of history over 100 years, so I better go on with it. My starting point, I suppose, is 1979, and that really is the inception of the period, the political period in which we now find ourselves in a catastrophic mess. When the Thatcher government came to power in 1979, it sought to fundamentally reshape the society in which we lived in, doing away with the post-war settlement of social democracy and a welfare state, and trying to turn Britain into a free market economic experiment. And we are living with the catastrophic consequences of that today in all manner of ways. But the start of Thatcher's attack and the focal point for their attack was an assault on the organisations of the working class, namely the trade unions. And she deliberately sought to dismantle trade union organisation and power. In 1979, workers in this country, 76% of them were covered by collective bargaining arrangements. Today, that figure stands at 26%, and there has been a corresponding catastrophic fall in people's pay levels and living standards since that attack began. Now, all of that came to a head in 2008 with the crash and the subsequent austerity programme. What happened in 2008 was caused by a casino capitalism and a banking crisis, but its roots actually lay in wage depression that had taken place since 1979, because people just didn't have enough money to meet their obligations. They were mortgaged up to the hilt, they were bank loans up to the hilt, they were credit carded, they were payday loans. They were in hock to loan sharks, and when that bubble burst, you would have thought that the ruling class might have had some humility and acknowledged that the society they'd shaped had been an absolute disaster, and all of the prosperity that we were promised through free market economics had just not come to fruition. And you would also have thought that the media and punditry class might have held to account at that point, and said you have presided over catastrophic failings in your great experiment, and now there needs to be a fundamental reshaping of society so that it works for the many and not the few. But we didn't see any of that. What we're seeing is the ruling class create a smokescreen that blamed us for the crisis that they created. They said our pensions were too generous, our pay levels were too generous, our terms and conditions were too generous, our benefits and our welfare state was overblown and needed to be cut. And under the guise of austerity, they continued to heap misery upon working class people in this country, and they continued their failed experiment unchecked. And there was an attempt by the trade unions in the early years of austerity to try to roll them back on that agenda. But we had to learn the lessons of our failure to do that when we look forward to the period that's now coming. We've seen 50 years of a catastrophic failing by the government to look after the interests of the citizens in this country. And pay restoration is going to be a key part of any attempt to rebuild Britain and make society better for the future. Now, we've seen the inception of a fight back this year with loads of trade unions entering industrial disputes with the employer. Ellie's union, the NEU, has been amongst them. My union, PCS, has been at the forefront of the fight. And we've wrought numerous concessions out to the employer and made numerous advancements through a programme of militant industrial action. But we have still not been able to secure an inflation-proofed pay rise. We've not been able to secure at this stage any degree of pay restoration. And our union will be taking stock of where we are after the talks at delegated level later this year to see if what's been enough, what's been won is enough, and our assessment is probably unlikely and further battles lie ahead. And just in thinking about how we fight those battles, my focus in this contribution needs to be on the issue of pay, and others will pick up other areas where we need to rebuild the nation. But I'd say there are 5 things that all trade unions need to be concentrating on in the current period. First of all, any pay rises that we do receive need to be inflation-proofed. but they also need to come with an element of restoration for the catastrophic drop in living standards that we've suffered in the last 50 years. Secondly, there needs to be a £15 an hour living wage, one index linked and inflation proofed for the future, so we don't see poverty pay becoming the norm over the next 50 years in the way that it has over the last 50. Thirdly, we need a restoration of collective bargaining, so we have minimum standards in employment across every sector of the UK, and that we don't have the race to the bottom and the division of worker against worker that we've seen over the last 5 decades. Fourthly, we need a recognition of the social and economic benefits of good pay and the value that brings. And finally, in the advent of a world when artificial intelligence is going to produce many, many challenges for working people, we need to be arguing for a workers' dividend of a shorter working week so that we share in those benefits. The last 50 years have been a catastrophe in terms of pay for people in this country. If the next 50 are going to be any better, then we have to all stand together in solidarity, support all the unions that are in struggle, because that is to roll back the worst excesses that we've seen over the past 50 years and rebuild the nation worthy of being called a society. Thanks very much.
And on that, I think it's really important to constantly spread that message of joining a union. Like, unions are cool. And especially to our younger comrades and people in our society. I grew up not really knowing or seeing trade union action in place. And I think it's really important to spread that to the younger generation to ensure that they're part of a union and they see the strength that that has. Next up, we have Kat Hobbs. Kat Hobbs is the founder and director of We Own It, who campaigned for public services to be publicly owned. They recently ran a successful campaign to stop the government's attempts to privatise Channel 4 and has recently launched a shares not fines campaign to take the water companies who are polluting our rivers and making massive profits whilst they're doing it back into public ownership, bit by bit. So over to Kat.
Thank you. It's great to be here this evening. We desperately need a Green New Deal to take us to net zero as quickly as possible, to make it affordable for people to live in this country, and to create good, decent union jobs. We can't get that Green New Deal while we're hanging on to this failed ideological experiment introduced by Thatcher in the 1980s of privatisation. The two things just don't go together. We have to have public ownership and a Green New Deal. The two things go hand in hand. That's partly for financial reasons. We're wasting so much money. We need 100% renewable energy. We need an end to oil and gas. We need to insulate every home in the country. We need cheaper bills. You can't fix all of that while we're spending the kind of obscene, while we're allowing the kind of obscene profits that the energy system is making. And if you want to understand just how obscene those profits are, I would recommend Unite's report on renationalising energy and their campaign to take back the power. We need to invest in infrastructure to stop sewage flowing in our rivers and in our seas. We need to stop leaks and save water so that we're ready for when we have water shortages in the future, which we will be having in this country. We can't do that when we're pouring 2 billion down the drain in shareholder dividends every single year. We need public transport that is so good that it gets people out of their cars and out of their planes, because why would they drive, why would they fly? That means it has to be free or at least very cheap. It has to be door to door. It has to be coordinated, joined up, not just a chaotic mishmash like we have with the current deregulated privatised system, so that you can walk, cycle, get the bus, take the tram, take the train, and it's all joined up. But we can't fix that and fund that when our buses are run by companies which are led by private shareholders, because they will cut lifeline services, they will increase fares, And we can't fix that when we have our trains, the literal trains on our network are owned by rolling stock companies who sometimes take up to £1 billion in profit every year. We need a well-funded, publicly owned NHS and a well-funded, publicly owned social care system to look after people in their hour of need, because care jobs are green jobs and they're vital, and we need care jobs also. We also need jobs in parks, in libraries, in museums, all of that infrastructure that this government is in the middle of destroying. And we can't have that when we're being underfunded and all of the money is flowing away into private equity companies who own our care homes and flowing away into contracts like the test and trace contract, which was privatised, 37 billion spent on something that didn't work, instead of funding our NHS and the people who work in it. So waste is important, but the other argument around waste is the waste of human potential. Because we keep being told that we can't do anything without the market, that the market has to solve all of our problems, that it has to do absolutely everything. And when the sea levels are rising, yes, you might be able to go on Amazon Prime and look for sandbags and have them delivered. Or you might even be able to go to your local hardware shop if you're lucky. But neither of those organisations are going to be making a plan to protect communities, to protect nature, and to look after people in that eventuality. This ideology that we're surrounded by is disempowering. And that's why we need democratic public ownership, and that's why we need a Green New Deal, and the two things go hand in hand. Governments can do things, councils can do things, communities can do things. We're being fed a big con, and I also recommend Mariana Mazzucato's book on that. And I've just got 1 minute to go. So I will say, if you want to help fix some of these problems, because humans like fixing problems, and that is the point here, and we don't only do it when we're incentivised by a market, by a financial market. So if you want to help fix problems, sign up to We Own It, support Unite's campaign to take back the power, support the RMT's campaign to get our ticket offices saved. Come, if you can, to Whitstable on Saturday, where SOS Whitstable, who've been campaigning to renationalise water, are organising a campaign, a protest against sewage in our seas, and I will be there. Come to Manchester on Sunday, where Greater Manchester is bringing buses into public control. There is some hope, people, because the Green New Deal and public ownership go hand in hand, and they won't happen without you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kat. And there's that list of things to do. I think that's a real takeaway from today, is we can't just listen to this information. We've got to think and act on the things that are presented here by our panel. So next up, we have Georgina Schuller, who is a housing campaigner and council tenant here in South London, with Refurbish, Don't Demolish, a campaign to save council estates and genuinely affordable homes instead of multi-million-pound regeneration projects that socially cleanse the area and cause untold environmental damage. Many thanks to Georgina. Over to you.
I still have to rely on my notes, so apologies. Because those advising government on housing policy know full well the most needed housing is for sub-market rent, council rent being the lowest. But it isn't the bulk of what developers are building. And the term affordable has become devoid of meaning, as it includes shared ownership for households on annual incomes of up to 90,000. Every year, an additional 100 households do not earn enough to access a mortgage or the private rented sector. In Lambeth, there are over 3,800 households in temporary accommodation. One of the main reasons for homelessness is eviction from the private rented sector, as rents spiral out of control well above inflation. No-fault evictions must be consigned to the bin, with tougher regulations in place to ensure properties are fit to live in. No one should be made ill by their home or impoverished by it. Tenants should be given a right to longer tenancies to give stability, with a fair rent policy reintroduced. An analysis was made by Savills of the Housing for Many Green paper, developed in Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. In the 2018 blog entitled, "Does building more council homes make good financial sense?" Savills concluded that it did, as building 1 million council homes, mostly at social rent over a 10-year period, would save billions in housing benefit. What doesn't make sense is continuing the right to buy, selling off council housing at huge discounts without replacing, and 40% of ex-council homes end up being rented privately at market rents. To ensure the future of council homes and their maintenance, an investigation into how the housing revenue account is used will be crucial, but tenants and residents have to be involved. In Lambeth, only 16% of housing revenue account is spent on repairs, a woefully inadequate amount that means council housing stock is falling into disrepair. And actually, I'll add to that, I found out from a friend today through a Freedom of Information request, only 6% of the housing revenue account was spent on their estate, and it is in a real state. The decline, some say, is managed, is being used as an excuse to push through plans to demolish 6 council estates, building back thousands of private for sale, with few, if any, extra council homes. On South Lambeth, one of the demolition estates, Lambeth has stumbled upon a solution to create more council homes and without losing what they have already. But actually, before I go on, I just want to show you the direction of travel for the estates that they're planning to demolish. This is a graph of the extra homes that they're planning on building on the estates. Now, the figures may have changed a bit, but the direction of travel is exactly the same. I'm not getting substantial amounts of extra council housing, and that's actually the housing that we most need. So back to South Lambeth Estate. They've built a decant block, and many residents have already moved. This presents Lambeth, and likely other councils and housing associations around the country, with a unique opportunity, because the empty blocks could be used to help train up a retrofit task force directly employed by the council, developing retrofitting skills currently in short supply. Retrofitting empty homes allows a deeper retrofit with far better insulation. It would be more cost effective and eliminates having to ask for huge contributions from leaseholders. Retrofitting would address fuel poverty far more quickly, bringing back empty homes into use, stabilise rents and keep communities together. Instead of -8 council homes on South Lambeth Estate, it would leave it with more extra council homes than the entire 6 estates demolition programme. Because Lambeth has borrowed £170 million, spent nearly 100 million already, buying back leaseholder properties, which should be returned as council housing. Councils must also stop acting as agents for property developers and disposing of publicly owned land for private housing. Far better to allow community-led housing, cooperatives and community land trusts to develop plans keeping housing for sale or rent at low cost in perpetuity. So dealing with the housing crisis isn't only about building more homes. To help mitigate the climate emergency, we should be conserving as much of the built environment and our natural resources as possible and bringing empty homes back into use. 80% of buildings in use today are expected to still be in use in 2050. So developing a refurbishing and retrofitting programme is a must. Getting housing policy right is foundational helping with the climate emergency, the cost of living crisis, fuel poverty, improving people's health and well-being, which in turn saves billions for the NHS, stabilising and safeguarding the next generation's future.
Georgina, I really hear you that having good housing and the well-being aspect of that, and I know I keep linking back to schools, but obviously we will have questions at the end, if that's okay.
And just a very quick point, it's important always to say that council housing is not subsidised. There is no subsidy allowed. On the estate across the road, Angeltown, with 400 or so council tenancies, Lambeth takes 2 million a year in rent and pays back less than £1 million on administration and maintenance. It is profitable.
Thank you for that point. Yeah, so I think the well-being aspect, and as I said, in my classroom, I see it every day, even with children suffering from asthma because of damp in their homes and a whole heap of things that comes with poor housing. Next we have Prem Sikka, who is the accountant and academic, who is Emeritus Professor of Accounting in the University of Sheffield and also Emeritus Professor of Accounting in the University of Essex. Prem worked in corporate accounting in the 1970s before going into academia, and in 2002 co-founded the Tax Justice Network. He also advised the Labour Party when Jeremy was leader and John MacDonald was Chancellor, helping develop policy related to tax, corporate governance and executive pay. So over to you.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. This is how so few are turned into so many. It is meetings like this, and that is really the way forward. As regards healthcare, which is what I've been asked to speak about, if we want people in good health, a key requirement is people must have good income, good wages, good pensions, good benefits, which gives access to nutritious food, good housing. People don't have to worry about insecurity. They don't have mental health problems. And we lack all of those things. Workers' share of the GDP now in the form of wages and salaries is about 50%. In 1976, it was 65.1%. So it has declined drastically. We have never-ending austerity, real wage cuts, pension cuts despite the triple lock. Between 2012 and 2019, austerity killed 335,000 people. That is according to academic research. That is 50,000 people a year have died because of government-imposed austerity. And obviously, if you're not getting good access to food, housing, you just make greater demands on the NHS. And NHS at the moment has 7.7 million waiting for hospital appointment. In the last year, 1 million people have gone private. So just imagine what the waiting list may have been, those who could actually afford it. 2.5 million people are declared to be chronically ill and unfit to work as a result. According to the Times, in the last 5 years, 1.5 million people have died while waiting for NHS hospital appointment. That is nearly over 2 million people dead because of government policies since 2010. And as a comparison, during the Second World War, the Luftwaffe bombing of Great Britain, the civilian deaths were 70,000. So 2 million people. We indeed have a genocidal state, and the people have to say, no, we will not run with any of his policies. How do we fund NHS? Now, interestingly, nobody asked that kind of a question when they bailed out banks. How do we fund it? They didn't ask that question when recently we bailed out the energy companies. Nobody asked that question when £895 billion of quantitative easing is handed to speculators. But when it comes to people's welfare, question is, how do we fund it? There are many ways, and we'll just concentrate on tax issues. There are numerous tax ways, and I've written various papers. Jeremy may have copies, and maybe I can send it to you. My suggestion is what we need to do is not increase taxes for the general population. So under my proposals, no increase in basic rate of tax, no increase in 40% rate of tax, no increase in VAT, no increase in national insurance contributions for about 97% of the population, no increase in corporation tax. All we need to do is attack the tax perks of the rich. So let me just give you some examples of what that would be. At the moment, you pay income tax on your wages at a rate of 20 to 45%. In comparison, if anyone makes capital gains from selling second homes, stocks and shares, dabbles on the stock market, betting on interest rates, foreign currency, exchange rates and so on, they pay tax in the range of 10 to 28% only. Dividends are taxed at a lower rate than wages. Recipients of investment income pay zero national insurance, even though they use the NHS and social care. Simply by ensuring that capital gains are taxed at the same rate as wages and charging national insurance could be up to £25 billion waiting for you. If you tax dividends at the same rate as wages and charge national insurance, £8 to £10 billion waiting. At the moment, you pay national insurance at the rate of 12%, up to income of up to 50,300. After that, it is only 2%. The richer you are, smaller proportion of your income you pay. If we were to spread that 12% to all income, well, that could raise another 14 or so billion pounds. We could have financial transaction tax. There's a levy on the shares for about the last 300 years, a tiny percentage. If we were to levy on all financial transactions, again, that would raise billions. Pensions, if you pay into your pension scheme, just I'll stop after this, I'm getting flagged here. There are many other examples I'll come back to later. If you make payment into your private pension scheme, you get tax relief. Most recent number is £48.2 billion for the year 2020 to 21. 2/3 of that went to the rich who are paying income tax at the rate of 40% and 45%. The rest went to basic rate taxpayers. Last year, there were 21 million adults, that is 42% of the adults, whose annual income was less than the personal allowance of £12,570. They got zero relief on anything they put aside for pension. So if we said we give everybody a 20% credit of whatever they pay into a pension scheme, that would release another possibly 10 to 12 billion pounds. So you see, I'm simply referring to the anomalies and tax perks of the rich, nothing else. Okay, no increase in headline rates. And I'll come back to some more maybe later on. Thank you very much.
And now I have an excuse to tell my kids in my class why maths is important. Let's give them a problem solving, how to tax the rich. Okay, next up we have Charlotte Khan. Charlotte Khan manages Care for Calais' Specialist Projects team. Specialist Projects has the responsibility for a range of crucial issues in connection with legal representation and challenges. Much of the work regularly hits the news, the Bibi Barge, Rwanda, Weatherfields, and we're really pleased to have Charlotte with us. So over to you.
For those of you who don't know us, Care for Calais are a refugee humanitarian charity, and we work out in Calais and also here in the UK. At Care for Calais, we see the devastating effects of the cruel and ineffective asylum policies. When the government choose these policies over more just and fair alternatives, it's the people that we support who suffer. And I want to take just two policies this evening and briefly discuss alternatives. The first is the Rwanda plan and its grotesque big brother, the Illegal Migration Bill. Both of these are based around the idea of inadmissibility, which is basically the UK government saying, sure, you know, you've come here for safety, you've probably got a really good claim, but we're not even going to bother to listen to it, let alone judge it. It is a total shirking of responsibility. And they tell us ad nauseum that they need these policies to stop the boats. The people affected by such policies include the men who we supported, who were earmarked for that first flight to Rwanda that I'm sure some of you will remember last year. This included a young guy he was a Syrian. He bravely made his way over here by himself to be reunited with his aunt and uncle in Manchester. And bless him, he had got so close. He had got so close to his safe place, to that embrace of family. And at the last moment, it was ripped away from him. He arrived on our shores and was taken into detention. And yes, a few weeks later, he was handcuffed and forced onto a plane that was headed for Rwanda. But it's not just those friends that we made who were put into detention that were affected by this. There are the thousands of others given the letters telling them that they might be sent to Rwanda. This includes one woman who we helped who was a pregnant rape survivor and whose baby stopped growing shortly after she got that letter. Profound damage is done to people through these policies, but they are also completely ineffective. Rwanda, remember, did not stop the boats. The Illegal Migration Bill will not stop the boats. But one alternative which may do is safe passage. The need is very, very clear. People are drowning in our channel. So Care for Calais are very proud along PCS, over there, Paul's here for PCS. We're very proud to have put together a policy paper which directly talks about safe passage and how that could be achieved. It would work similar to the Ukrainian system. People would access it online from mainland Europe, and they would have a process where you'd be able to put forward your viable claims for asylum, and you would be given safe passage to the UK to be able to do so, to enter the asylum system when you arrive. This would eliminate the smuggler's business model overnight and the need for people to risk their lives, most importantly. The other policy I want to mention briefly is the housing of asylum seekers in barges and barracks. We are told this must be done to stop the cost of the hotels, and also told that it's going to be another deterrent, which we know don't work. Last week, I was sitting with a guy who had been placed on the Bibby barge before, of course, Legionella forced the Home Office to move them off. He's an Iranian and he's fleeing religious persecution in his homeland. He was chatting to me and opening up about what he'd fled, why he'd fled, and the awful journey he'd had to get here. He was an exhausted man, and he said to me, I just want to feel safe. We also support those in the Wethersfield RAF camp, those that tell us of their stories of fleeing war in Sudan, the torture that they've survived in Libya. We hear many, many stories like that. And then to our shame, as if that wasn't enough, we then have to hear of the fear and the re-traumatisation that is happening right now in the UK because they are being held in prison-like conditions on barges and military camps. Again, these policies come with huge human cost. But also, did they save money on accommodation? The barge system alone, it's been quoted, is costing 1.6 billion in costs, contracts, subcontracts, service providers, it goes on and on. Someone is really profiting from this. Someone is making a nice penny off the back of all this suffering. But it's not the taxpayer, it's not you and me. So No, it hasn't saved any money. The alternative? Process the claims. Invest in decision makers so that there is no need in the first place for such long-term asylum accommodation. Process the claims so people can begin to rebuild their lives in our communities and contribute to our economy like they so long to do. The answer is almost embarrassingly simple. Choose policies based on fairness and justice, and the issues will almost start to fix themselves. It has always been a choice. The government are choosing these cruel and hostile policies. So we have a choice, and when people come asking for our help and for sanctuary, how will we treat them? Thank you.
Those personal stories throughout that were really moving. And I just also wanted to mention that with Care for Calais, a lot of unions do solidarity trips there and do delegations. I know the NEU does, and I believe, well, when I've been to the warehouse, it's covered in trade union banners. So if you're a member of a union, which you all will be, or should be,
Or will be.
then please do push your union to try and connect with Care for Calais and take some delegations. So our final speaker tonight is Jeremy Corbyn, who's a Member of Parliament in Islington North since 1983 and was leader of the Labour Party from 2015 to 2020. After stepping down, he founded Peace and Justice Project, who have brought us here tonight and continue to lead our movement and the struggle for social justice and a world free from war. So.
Thanks, and thanks Ellie for chairing tonight, and thanks to everyone else who's spoken already. Sorry I was a few minutes late coming. I was doing something in Parliament which went on slightly longer than I expected. We founded the Peace and Justice Project in January after the general election, so it finally launched in January 21. The whole point behind it was that the direction of political discourse post-COVID seems to be going in completely the wrong direction. It was not recognising the fundamental levels of inequality and poverty within our society, and instead both parties were competing for the same, again, we'll manage it better than you manage it, you'll manage it worse than us, we'll manage it different. The point is to recognise the fundamental problems and inequalities within our society, and unless we redress this fundamental imbalance, our public services won't work, our unemployment and poverty levels will get worse, and the level of hopelessness and depression that so many people suffer from will continue to get worse as well. And there is a link between mental health and depression and the state of economic well-being and the stress that people face in life. I'll come on to that in a moment. And in a global sense, surely to goodness, if you look at the world's problems as of now, what do you see? An obvious environmental disaster happening in many places. Foul air in big cities, stunted development and life for the poorest children in the biggest cities, in the poorest countries, and in some of the richest countries. Massive loss of wildlife and biodiversity, and environmental refugees streaming out of places which are no longer agriculturally sustainable. Darfur and other places spring to mind. And wars. Yes, there's a lot of reporting of the war in Ukraine. It's wrong, Russia is wrong, but we have to stop wars. There are 41 different conflicts going on around the world. And in response to all this poverty, injustice and inequality, most countries are rearming and spending more and more on armaments and proportionally less and less on health, education, housing, social justice and environmental sustainability. And so there has to be an alternative put. My whole philosophy in leading the Labour Party was to recognise the grassroots support that had given me the authority to lead the party, but also that the only future for the Labour movement was in grassroots organising and the strength of communities and people making demands, which then brings about an aggregation, which brings about massive social change in the end. You can dictate, you can impose, but then somebody else can dictate and impose. What you can't change is that massive upsurge of popular activity. And I have spent the last years and will continue for the rest of my life being active on picket lines, causes and demonstrations. And what I've found so inspiring of the past year, we haven't won every dispute, we haven't won every pay claim, we haven't won every issue, for sure, obviously. But all those causes have come together and given people a sense of confidence and a sense of hope. That confidence and that hope is not going to go away, of building the kind of society we want to build. Hence the 5 points we put forward, and I can see the chair becoming distressed, so I'll be very quick. Is that a number 2 in front of you?
Oh, yeah, it is. It's not quite there yet, but.
It's about to come, okay. Right, quickly, 5 points. 1, poverty and pay. All the wage demands at the moment are, generally speaking, demands to catch up with the cuts that have taken place since 2008. There's been at least a 20% cut in working class living standards in the past 12 years. Think about that. A fifth of the income has gone from most working class families. Even in my constituency, over 40% of the children are growing up in relative poverty. And there are more food banks than there are branches of McDonald's. And something so disgusting as the 2-child policy, introduced by some kind of 19th century patronage by Ian Duncan Smith. A 4-child family loses £110 per week in benefits that they should get if they're on universal credit. And you can do the maths for any larger families than that. Tomorrow I'll build a picket line with the doctors, and they've just seen a massive loss of income over the past decade. Incredibly hard-working hospital doctors, incredibly dedicated, decent people. And I'm just so impressed with them and the conversations I have with them. And they say they're mopping up the price of poverty so often in hospitals. Second, the Green New Deal. Now, I discussed at great length with a lot of people how we bring about a sustainable environment in our society. At one level, environmental escapism is an option if you can afford it. You buy organic food, you go and live somewhere that's got lower levels of pollution, and you give money to Greenpeace. I give money to Greenpeace, so I'm not condemning anyone that gives money to Greenpeace, but giving money to Greenpeace isn't the only thing you have to do. It has to be about how we change the approach on the environment, hence the green industrial revolution. We don't condemn people who happen to have a job driving a diesel truck or work in the steelworks. We want them to be doing something different. We don't want a green industrial revolution to create the kind of social chaos that happened throughout the mining communities when Thatcher closed down the pits. What we want is a green industrial revolution that invests in those communities to transform them into something sustainable and green, and an energy system that is sustainable as well. And so you have to have a buy-in for that. And I'm very pleased to have a booklet produced by your union many years ago, a million jobs a year from green energy could be created. Fantastic publication. So it is a trade union issue. Third issue, housing. I represent, as you know, an inner city constituency. The housing crisis is real and it's terrible. I found myself writing yet again to Peabody Trust today to saying, what the hell are you doing selling off properties in my community? What the hell are you doing disposing of social housing when I can tell you there are 10 to 15,000 people on the housing needs register in my borough alone, and I hazard to say it'd be the same in Lambeth or any other borough in London, roughly the same anyway. And so we're only going to solve the housing crisis by investment in council housing, sustainable, secure, decent, good quality accommodation. How can a child achieve at school if they're sharing a bedroom with 3 other siblings, fighting over access to a computer if they're studying at home, and hardly any open space to play in? We've got to give better for our children in the poorest communities. You don't do that by freeing up the private rental sector to fleece us all with increased rents. You do that by investment in good quality council housing. The health service is something we all dearly love. And I'm a child of the health service. I'm very proud of the fact that one of my aunties was one of the first nurses ever to qualify in the NHS, and she was very proud all her life, working as an NHS nurse. And she said it was the greatest thing she'd ever done. She was proud of her work. And we pride ourselves on loving the NHS, but it's been destroyed before our very eyes through the Health and Social Care Act, privatisation, opting out of services, and now rationing of medicines and rationing of operations for very complicated conditions. So what's the alternative? 1, properly fund the NHS. 2, create a publicly owned pharmaceutical company that can provide generic medicines for the NHS. And 3, end the whole scandal of the internal market and have the NHS focus on healthcare and delivery of healthcare rather than profit centres within the NHS, which benefits the contractors that come in. We got sent in out of the GP practice in my constituency. But do you remember when I said to Boris Johnson in 2019, you're handing our NHS over to American healthcare companies? I produced the evidence of the secret talks going on between the government and so on. What was our media's response? To say I was spouting Russian propaganda. I'm really still puzzled about this one. I couldn't work out how the Russians ever got involved in the development of Centene as an American GP company that's coming over here to take over our GP practice. If anybody's got the answer, please let me know. But the last thing I'd say on health is it's not just defending, it's extending. So many families, everybody here must know them, middle-aged couples or middle-aged people going into debt to fund their kids through uni, going into debt to fund their parents' social care, mortgaging their homes, remortgaging and mortgaging again at a time of their lives if they own a property when they thought they could have a slightly more relaxed way of doing things. We need a national care service on the same principle as the NHS. When I proposed this during a radio talk the other week on Ian Dale's show on LBC, the Tory MP who was on with me, Danny Kruger, said I had threatened the country with a national care service, and what I had said was deeply threatening to our way of life. Wow. I mean, I thought even by the standards of the sort of madness of that level of the Tory party, this was really quite something. Well, I'm happy to threaten all these care companies and privateers with a national care service, publicly owned and publicly run, and run by people that believe in care, not profit from care. That's the difference. Last thing I'll say, because I've seen the 1 minute sign coming up. That was a very long 1 minute, by the way. The last thing I'd say is thank you to Care for Calais for what you've done. I've been in Calais a few times and I've seen the incredible work you've done, and I have managed to persuade the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe to send a delegation to examine the conditions in Calais. And indeed, I'm going to be part of that delegation examining the conditions in Calais. And I've walked around Calais, met a lot of people, fantastic volunteers in the community kitchen there, fantastic volunteers in the Caritas Centre. But the people are victims of war. I met somebody that didn't know how he got from Afghanistan to Calais. He didn't know the borders he had crossed. He didn't know where he'd been. He just knew he was desperate to find a place of safety, where he isn't harassed by the police, where he isn't beaten up by the far right, Whereas food isn't destroyed by police action, or the water carriers stabbed with a knife to make sure there's no water left in them for him to drink. He just wanted a place of safety. And then, not so long ago, I met two young men in Yorkshire, very smart young men. I was asked to go and see them, so I said, okay, yeah, come. These two smart young men, and they said, we wanted to talk to you. I said, okay, what about? They said, well, it's nice to see you again. And I looked at them and I said, sorry, I really can't remember when we met last time. You know what they said? There were two guys studying in university to be engineers in this country. They said, you came to our tent in Calais.
Oh.
They're going to make a contribution to our world. And so the whole point behind the PJP is globalism and internationalism, solidarity with those governments around the world, in Colombia, in Mexico, in Brazil, in other places that are trying to turn over the gross injustices of history and trying to keep peace in the world. So while the world is spending more and more on weapons, what we need is more and more resources going to the poorest people in the world. Hence, on November the 18th, we're holding an international conference. It'll be held at the offices of the International Transport Federation in Borough. It'll be a global conference with speakers from every continent. Some will be here, some will be coming online. And Lara Alvarez is over there, who is the international coordinator for the Peace and Justice Project. So we build it up as real solidarity with people that are victims of global injustice and of war. There are no winners in war. There are only relativities of losers in war. Obviously, what Russia's done in Ukraine is wrong. Everybody knows that at some point that war is going to end with some kind of negotiations. Well done, the African Union. Well done, the Latin American heads of state that have tried to move the ball down the road on this. And what are we doing? We're sending uranium-tipped weapons and cluster bombs, which will leave behind cancers for generations to come. All those uranium-tipped weapons, depleted uranium-tipped weapons that were used in Iraq after the Gulf War in 1991 caused cancers which are still caused in southern Iraq because of that. And all those trillions, or billions rather, that went into the war in Afghanistan, what's it left behind? The world's poorest, most hungry country with the least respect for human rights anywhere on the planet. There's got to be a different and better way. And that's why we make the call for peace. Calling for peace during a time of war, somebody said to me, is deeply irresponsible. But if you can't call for peace during a war, when can you call for peace? So let's make that message there. International justice, which will bring about the solidarity, which ultimately does help to bring about the peace. Thank you very much.
So, a reminder of those 5 demands: a real pay rise for all, democratic ownership and a Green New Deal, housing for the many, tax the rich to save the NHS, and welcome refugees. So,
And we'll quiz you on them at the end to see you remember it.
we will, out of 5. Right, what we're going to do now is I'm going to leave you to have a little think of some questions, but very, very briefly, I thought if there is anyone, we're running a little bit out of time, but if there's anyone on the panel that kind of wants to come back on something someone else has said.
Just building on what Jeremy said about ending the scandal in the internal market in the NHS, I wanted to make a plug for a petition that we're running, which is a little bit ambitious. It's asking Keir Starmer to reinstate the NHS as a fully public service, the way it was intended in 1948. It's just around 20,000 right now. We want to grow it before Labour Party conference. We want it to hit the Parliament and to really realise actually people want this and there's going to be momentum behind it. So if you agree please sign it. It's weownit.org.uk. It's on our homepage. You can't miss it. And please share it with your networks and let's make it happen. Thank you.
Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Who would like back on the question first?
Okay, thanks. I didn't reply to the first round of questions, so I will very briefly. Josephine, thanks very much for the point you made. And if I left the word socialist out of my original discourse, it's there now. Okay. I'm also full of admiration for a lot of the activists in Brixton, in Lambeth, in Southwark, over years that have stopped some of the worst developments. Yeah, there's some terrible things happened as well, but also stopped some of the worst developments. And just remember that those people that took dramatic action at times, and they were very unpopular, changed our world massively. The Chartist big demonstration was actually in Kennington Park, the one that was deemed to be utterly defeated by the Times newspaper. Within 50 years, every one of its demands except for annual parliaments had been met. And so we should just think historically. So many of our children are disempowered by the history they're taught and disempowered by the way they're taught to look at society, sort of meant to believe that they have no power whatsoever. Why do we have a right of access to the countryside? People say, well, I don't know, why? Mass trespass at Kinder Scout in the 1930s. People went to prison for trespassing on grouse moors when they said the working class of Manchester should be allowed to go on to Kinder Scout. They won. They made a massive difference to our world. And there are so many others. All those squatting communities that developed after the Second World War squatted all around Swiss Cottage and all around the wealthiest parts of London. They were soldiers mainly that had come home to homelessness and weren't prepared to put up with it. So there's plenty of examples that we should always be proud of. And I always feel that the way in which our children are brought up too often is to worship celebrity, worship possession of ephemeral goods, but not brought up with the same kind of social values that are so important within any society. And that isn't done just in schools. It's done by the way in which all campaigns conduct themselves. And that's why I've been very interested to watch the way in which the union struggles of the past 2 years have been very different to union struggles of the past. I used to be a union organizer in the 80s, and you'd have a rally in support of a strike or an action. Other people would turn up and say, can we talk about this campaign or that campaign? And most times they'd be told to sod off. You said, look, hang on, this is our campaign, we're here for our money, we're not interested in what you've got to say. That's not the case now. It's just not the case at all. I'm not saying that was universal, it didn't happen everywhere, but there were occasions where that sort of simplistic view was taken. I was at this big rally outside King's Cross Station called by the RMT. Every other campaign turned up. People haven't gone away and haven't disappeared and haven't given up on hope. And so I think that's important. And it's also important how we communicate with people. The point that Kat was making about public ownership, there's overwhelmingly a case of public ownership of the very least of mail, rail, water and energy, the very least. Water, 300,000 sewage discharges last year? I mean, that in itself should be the answer to it. But I don't want a public ownership which is just a national corporation running an industry, which is hardly any different to any other industry running it. I remember campaigning against the privatisation of electricity, giving out leaflets on the Holloway Road about why it shouldn't be privatised. A lot of people said, well, are you sure it's publicly owned? I said, yeah, it really is. They said, are you sure about that? Because it don't feel like it when I go there. I don't feel any empathy whatsoever for the electricity company, the gas company, or anybody else. And so it has to be a much more democratic form of public ownership. And water is the best example. You'd have to develop water enterprises, if you want to call them that, on roughly the same area basis as there are water companies at the moment, because that makes sense where the water supply is and the rivers and so on. But they should be run by those that work there. They should be run by the community, run by local government, run by local businesses, run as part of the community. And the basic requirement has got to be two things: supply of water and sustain the environment. At the moment, we've got profit-centered water companies that try to get away with not caring for the environment and export their capital and their profits somewhere else. And the same applies to the other things. So it is important to do that. Now then, the two other points before I stop. Unless we act politically and unite people to improve living standards and give hope to people, the far right are knocking on the door all over Europe. This time, they're blaming refugees for being the cause of the poverty of people. Listen to Farage, read the papers in Kent, read the subliminal titles on GB News and elsewhere, and you see this constant blaming of this apparent insurge of vast numbers of people on small boats from Calais. I mean, the numbers of people that have come from Calais wouldn't even fill a football stadium. But if you read some of our papers, you would imagine it's millions of people that have arrived. Deliberate and gross exaggeration. I hear this stuff in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, where the far right, from Hungary, from Germany, from Italy, and so on, make a big stink. And I mean, some of us do oppose them, but they do make a big stink. If we don't organise people into understanding that they can improve their living standards by popular action, then the voice of the far right, which will blame the minority, will gain more support and more credibility. So we have to be organised in that sense. And that means also looking at redistribution of wealth and power. Your point about universal basic income. I want an environmentally sustainable world. If the world is based on exploitation of natural resources and profit, then the exploitation will get worse, the pollution will get worse, the inequality will get worse. If you live in a world that's based on sustainability and ensuring everyone has enough to eat, a school to go to, a hospital to go to, all these things which are quite possible, then you have to look at it in terms of redistribution. I'm interested in looking at the way universal basic income could be developed. I mean, your example of providing everyone with a low cost or free limited amount of energy, and if you're determined to turn your heating up to 30 degrees all the time, then I think you should pay for that luxury rather than expect the rest of us to pay for it. And same with water. If you want to fill your swimming pool, well, that's your choice, but please pay for it. But make sure the rest of us do get enough water for ourselves. And so it is a socialist ideal that we have to push there. This then comes to the question of political organisation. I found some opposition to my leadership of the party in expected quarters, but also in unexpected quarters. To be quite honest, I underestimated the degrees of internal opposition there would be. And I think a lot of other people did as well. There are a lot of people who pretend to want to live in a socially just world. Actually, they don't. They want to live in a world that provides well for them, not for the rest of us. And so it is about transforming, which is why my determination was about community organising as a way of communities empowering themselves to get a nursery, to get a park, to keep a school, to build a hospital, whatever. There's an awful lot of things that can be done there. And that surely is what we have to do. Now, is this all going to happen tomorrow? No. But are all these campaigns going to help make a difference in an aggregation of the people that became politicised after 2015? Yes. And I'm delighted what Kat just said about doing a weekly YouTube. Great, fantastic. We can share that, we can all share that. We can put it up on our own channels. And when we do the international conference in November, we want to put that up on everybody's channel. So all of these activist groups become an aggregation share. That in itself will lead to a much stronger, much more defined political movement. Make the demands, because if we don't make the demands, then living standards will continue to fall, inequality will continue to grow, and the arguments that Prem puts forward, which are incredibly rational and sensible and reasonable about a system of taxation that is a bit fairer. I went to speak to the CBI conference one year. It was interesting. I went there and I explained to them all the taxation proposals I put forward, which is raising corporation tax and so on and so on. I didn't get a standing ovation every time I said we're going to increase tax, but they were interested in the ideas about training and education and workers' rights. And I pointed out to them that workers' rights were actually something that was a fundamental human right, and put it in that sense. But then I ended the speech and said, look, I get it that most of you don't agree with me. I get it that you have a different agenda. But let me just tell you this. When you've got a nice weekend and you go into your office on a Monday morning, are you happy stepping over somebody that's sleeping on the street outside your office? Are you happy with a society that tolerates thousands of people with nowhere to live, not enough to eat, and no hope in their lives? Are you really happy with that? Or don't you believe we have a social duty to each other? I just left them with a few moral thoughts. I'm not sure it convinced any of them, but I made my effort. Okay. And so we are very active in supporting Music for the Many campaign. Sam has been organising this with a series of concerts around the country, defending live music venues, but also inspiring people to come together through music, theatre, dance, and so on, because that's the inspiration that people get and come from. And last weekend I was in Mahublis in the west of Wales for the El Sueño Existe Day festival. That's The Dream Still Exists. And that's in memory of Victor Jara, who was murdered in the coup in Chile in 1973, a great singer. And we saw a film called The Cultural Train, which was during the years of popular unity in Chile. They were bringing good quality theatre and music to every town and village in the whole country by train. A trainload of musicians would turn up, set up a stage outside the station and give a local concert. And that brought people together. And it brought people together who would do stuff themselves. And so I, as you possibly know, like poetry very much. And Len McCluskey and I discovered we both like poetry very much. So we organised a Poetry for the Many event at the Casa in Liverpool. A very large number of people attended. A lot of young people turned up and said, can we read our own poems? I said, go ahead, please do. And so we're producing a book which is coming out soon called Poetry for the Many, which is a selections of poems that have been chosen by Len, myself, Maxine Peake and Michael Rosen and a few other people. But it's also, I hope, will be followed by a sequel of Poetry from the Many, because too many young people feel embarrassed at showing their imagination. No, you should be proud of it. And that is what it's about. So it's all of these things. And of course, internationally, in solidarity with trade union struggles, millions of people around the world work in the gig economy. They have no trade union rights. They don't even know who their employer is. In this country, in France, in the United States, in Brazil, all over. And it's gig economy workers, the ones that need to be in unions. And so we obviously support union rights campaigns. We're working with the Bakers Union on getting Samworths, a very big bakery that bakes for Tesco and others, to be fully unionised. But we're also working with the campaign on Starbucks, Amazon, and all those big companies that need to be unionised. That's tough. It's not easy work. But it's very important we do it. We work with Chris Smalls in the United States, who's managed to win some victories in some Amazon warehouses in the USA, and we're working with the GMB on the campaign in Coventry. And so we're doing a whole lot of things, and your support is really, really much appreciated. I just want the whole campaign to get bigger, stronger, and more determined. And the 5 points that we've put forward here, as you kindly explained, Michael, are sensible points. Nobody can really, if they think about it, fundamentally disagree with those if they call themselves any kind of person on the left or a socialist. But if Labour is to go into the election merely promising to carry on with the spending plans of the Tories and not change the taxation policies and not even end the 2-child limit on benefits, then I really struggle as to see where the appeal is on real change. This society needs real change. If we don't confront the inequalities will confront all of us more and more and more. we'll lose our health service, we'll lose our education service, we'll lose our housing services, and we'll end up being a free market economy with massive levels of poverty and a minority of very wealthy people living very comfortable lives behind security fences to protect them. I don't want to live in that kind of world. I want to live in a world that cares for all. And you know what? You can learn from everybody. Some of the wisest people are those sleeping on the streets because they've seen what's happened. So let's be together, be strong and be determined. Determination brings about change. Those people that met in Kennington Park in the middle of the 19th century, brave, wonderful people, had a vision of a more decent world for the future. That vision has never gone away and it never will. Thank you.
Before we continue, I just want to thank everyone who joined us online because they are here with us. Do you mind if you wait till?
May I shamelessly promote the new petition that's just been set up a couple of days, and it's, I mean, I don't have a look. It's to try and save council housing by getting it retrofitted instead, and at the same time setting up a retrofit task force.
Put it on the microphone so it goes online.
So we, as I said earlier, we need to set up a retrofit task force to retrofit our homes. Most of our homes are going to still be with us in the year 2050, and we need a retrofit task force to enable to insulate them better, put in heat pumps, solar powers, whatever is appropriate for whichever housing type. At the moment, we have a campaign going which are trying to save the 6 estates that Lambeth are still proposing to demolish. I've done the maths on this, and it kind of works out that if this estate was saved, if this estate was retrofitted instead, it would serve 2 things. It would train up people at the same time as saving the housing. And so just by retrofitting this estate alone, you'd end up with more council homes in the entire 6 estates demolition programme. So if you save the other 6 estates as well, you're saving the council homes and you're stopping this from happening. Council estates being overrun by private developments.
And I've just been told that all the links tonight, including that petition, will be emailed out to you, so you'll have easy access to them, but do feel free to come to the front and have a look as well. So thank you everyone for coming this evening. It's been a brilliant discussion. It's been really uplifting and empowering that even in the society we live that can be quite dreary at times, there is hope and we can come together and we can make change, as we've seen from many of the people speaking tonight. So it's our time now to take those demands, and we need to take them to our friends, we need to take them to our colleagues, we need to have conversations at street stalls, door knocking, persuasive conversations to get people on board. We need to get our neighbours involved, and we need to be taking these to our communities and networks and build those grassroots campaigns for building an alternative, and that's starting here in Brixton, and we can see from so many things here already. But with that comes responsibility, and some of us, we need to stand up to make sure that these campaigns and these demands are upheld. So what we're asking today from this meeting is if there's anyone here today who would be happy to be a point of contact in this area, so that we can start building and have a communication between us and build networks across London, across the UK. So is there anyone here tonight who would be happy to be a point of contact in the area? I've got one here. A couple at the back. Can we give them a round of applause? And if you could just come and see, maybe go to the front desk afterwards, and we will take your contact details. So thank you so much. Please keep that pamphlet on your chair. Make sure you're sharing online these demands, taking it out to your union branches, taking model motions, and really spreading this message, because together we can bring change. We've got to work together to empower each other to build a better future. So thank you so much.